The average South African worker spends most of their time at work on top of having to travel far distances to get there. A lot of these workers have to endure tough working conditions, the result of which is frequent burnout and unspoken mental health challenges. How do we deal with these developing mental health crises among the workers? Workers' World Labour Show starts now.
From England to Poland, every step across the ocean, the ruling classes, them is in a mess. Oh yes, the capitalist system a regress, but the Soviet system now progress. So which one of them you think is best?
Welcome to our weekly Workers' World Labour Show. I'm your host, Ashrik Chubadi. Thank you once again for having joined us. Now, the public sector workers like nurses, doctors, teachers and the police are in the front line of having to respond to the needs of South Africans in their very basic daily lives. In a crisis-ridden country like South Africa, with an under-resourced public sector having to deal with a myriad of widespread socio-economic problems due to poverty and inequality, government ineptitude, mismanagement and corruption in the public sector, and workers who have to bear the daily brunt of this burden. Inevitably, this leads to an impact on their mental and their physical health. And in today's show, we look at the issues around mental health and the problems that workers have to endure, especially those in the public sector. But before we get there, let's now go to the insert prepared for us by the Workers' World Media Productions editorial team.
The National Coronavirus Command Council has decided to enforce a nationwide lockdown for 21 days with effect from midnight on Thursday, the 26th of March.
Reporters are all over the story, of course, covering every angle.
South Africa is now fifth on the global COVID-19 list of infections.
Uninzi olahlekelwe imisebenzi ngexesha lokumiswa ngqi kwentshukumo liyavutha ngumsindo.
COVID and being a frontline worker, it caused tremendous pressure on the mental health, as none of us were trained to deal with so much death.
Everybody was affected. I mean, if we take, for example, the health sector, where you had doctors and nurses, healthcare professionals dealing with, firstly, the pandemic, the virus itself, and also then having to support, other people who are dealing with the virus at home and all of that. So I wouldn't say there's a specific sector. I think just across the board, everybody was impacted by the lockdown.
Staying away from work, suffering from depression, those kind of things has definitely escalated. And I almost want to say, I can't base this on anything scientific or anything, but our health workers took a very big knock during COVID.
So then we need to think about everyone else. We need to think about people in retail where shops were still open and they were exposed to other people and they had to go back to their families.
The working from home situation, it had to be, it had to happen. But I think that in itself has had a massive impact on people's mental health. Socially, it's just become, some people became complete. They didn't want to go anywhere, didn't want to socialize.
Our perspective is that mental health cannot be delinked from the socio-economic situation in the country and from the living and working conditions of people. If you look at some of the causes of mental health, it will be things like child abuse, trauma, social isolation, and discrimination.
I think the dangers of being untreated is really vast and quite severe. It can have such a debilitating impact on our lives when we are mentally ill.
People need to educate themselves on mental health in general, because now we're really long past the times where we said, depression is not real or it's not a real thing. We are way past that. We know depression is real. We know mental health disorders are real. Therefore, you have to educate yourself, because just because it doesn't happen to you doesn't mean it won't happen to someone close to you.
The reason why mental illness is marginalized is that both the government and the employer don't want people to reflect on the systemic structural and institutional reasons that account for mental illness.
I'm a single parent. Sinabantwana sizi-breadwinner ezindlini. Ngoku ke ngokubuhlungu ukuthi akumnandanga kululanga into yoba sizoluza umsebenzi.
Inadequate training, orientation of people who deal with people with mental illness. I think already that is a problem.
Trade unions can really have a big impact in employee mental well-being and health. I think because they have such a big platform and such a loud voice.
What we do is that we include education of mental health when we are dealing with, for example, occupational health and safety. We don't just focus on biological hazards, chemical hazards. We also look at psychosocial hazards and emphasize the relationship between mental health and the working conditions of people. And we try to push that people must try to raise occupational health and safety and issues of mental wellness and the overall wellness of employees.
When we make people aware of mental health, we also help lessen the stigma. So the more that people are aware that mental health is a real thing, the more educated they become, the less the stigma, and also then the less people feel ashamed or embarrassed to actually seek out help when they are struggling with their mental health.
All right, there we have it. Mental health is in and amongst itself a living condition that many people struggle with. But if there's work issues that contribute to it, it poses an even greater significant threat. And that's a conversation we're going to pick up now with Ruben Maleka, the Deputy General Manager for the Public Servants Association of South Africa. We also have Senzekele Shongwe, the spokesperson and Senior Counsellor for the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, SADC. Also Richard Mambabolo, spokesperson for POPCRU, the policing union. Thank you so very much for being with us. I want to pick off start off with you, Ms. Shongwe, from SADC. Maybe just to start off with how we define mental health and mental health that do from time to time take a bit of strain.
So mental health is a state of mental well-being. So a lot of people sometimes confuse the term mental health with the term mental illness. We use it quite interchangeably. So when we talk about mental health, it is a state of well-being whereby you feel like you are in a good space, you're able to focus when you have to focus, you're able to make good decisions for yourself, and you have got a certain functionality in your life that is not disturbed because of psychological difficulties. And then when we talk about mental illness is now when that well-being is being disturbed, and then there is a dysfunctionality in the way that you do the things that you love doing, in the way that you operate in your life because of a disturbance in your mind.
Yeah, and just to stay on that point, what are some of the main contributors to a challenging mental health status?
Sure, there is quite a lot. Firstly, there are people that are born with a genetic vulnerability to a mental illness. So they do not have to undergo any trauma or any life stresses. You find that they come from a family or a genetic background of people that have got or have had mental illnesses, and then they are susceptible to getting one as well. And then there are people that undergo quite a lot of traumas, or even like one big trauma in their lives that changes the whole thing, and it really affects them psychologically. And then it is the stresses that we go through on a day-to-day basis, whereby you find that you are working in a very difficult environment, or you've had a divorce, or you didn't grow up in an environment that was safe and loving and caring. Yeah. You might find that contributes to struggling with your mental health.
And surely, Richard, work nonetheless is also a big contributor, isn't it? Especially for those workers that work in such a highly pressurized environment, such as the police service?
Most definitely. I think one of the experiences we've had within the SAPS, more specifically, has been issues around suicide, wherein some officers commit suicide. I think there are about 20 cases reported just in the past 2 years. So that definitely does demonstrate that a lot of our officers go through post-traumatic stress disorder, which is, of course, right within the SAPS due to the nature of the work that they do. I would imagine that our members go to crime scenes and, of course, witness a lot of brutalities. So in addressing all these challenges, we think that there has been a contribution, but however, the challenge has been that a lot of them do not come out and disclose their statuses. So it becomes difficult as to establish, the numbers of police officers affected. But in most cases, we realized after certain acts had been committed that there were these challenges.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on some of those challenges with you a bit later. Just from your perspective, Mr. Ruben, what is, do you think that the employer understands or that it's part of work policy to give due consideration to mental health?
Yeah, thank you very much. Indeed, when you talk about mental health, we are talking about the well-being of a human being, meaning that emotional, physical, mental is the totality of a human being. So obviously in the public service, we all know that there are various departments that will say they've got employee wellness departments. However, we all know that at this point in time, there are serious challenges in the public service as it relates to implementation and observation of the occupational health and safety, because we believe that the occupational health and safety contributes much to the well-being of employees in the workplace. And we have done some much of survey, and if you look at the past 3 years, it has been the PSA consistent way of saying to the public service departments or employers to say that they need to comply with the occupational health and safety.
And I want to talk about what that compliance looks like and whether it is being implemented once we do return from the break. Do stay with us. We're talking about mental health.
Welcome back. Your Labour News highlights this week. Unemployment Insurance Fund condemns death threat against staff member. Truck drivers arrested for theft of Eskom coal. Joburg municipal workers go back to work after strike over pay discrepancies. It is alleged and estimated that more than 6,500 migrant workers have lost their lives constructing the $220 billion infrastructure for Qatar to host the 2022 FIFA Football World Cup. And workers at the Apple and Foxconn are demanding better working conditions. Do stay tuned later for the full bulletin. Continuing this week's topic of discussion, here's Tashreeq.
A very disturbing statistic that South Africa is one of the countries that has the highest amount of people that contribute to suicide. And that's in part our conversation here today, looking at the mental health challenges affecting workers. You spoke, Ruben, just before we went to the break, about the fact that we sit with a compliance issue in regards to legislation, existing legislation. Does that legislation or the rules that governs the workplace, does it adequately deal with mental health issues? Does it respond to it?
No, there's a little bit, lack of compliance, especially in the public service. I want to give two typical examples that obviously is something that is of the public. You recall the incident of the Lisbon building, where some of the employees also, lost their lives in that workplace. We also talk about is unfortunately a Department of Health, which is the National Department of Health, Civitas building, where it took us a year to demonstrate as unions to force the employer to move the employees from that particular building because it did not comply with the occupational health and safety, to a point that it is only now, almost from last year, that the minister agreed that they must move and close down, shut down that particular building because it's not comply with occupational health and safety. Because if you look at the trauma that it has brought to most of the members, we had to even employ a service provider that is now full-time based at the department to do some sort of counseling, because most of the employees, some of them lost their lives, some lost their colleagues in the workplace, some were physically affected by the nature of non-compliance to health and safety of such a building.
Yeah, but how to define how they go about their work, I suppose, is what I'm quite interested in, because Mashongwe, I think you're better placed to tell us that mental health manifests very differently. Of course, we look at the more violent ones like the suicide or what the consequences of burnout would be. But en route to being burnt out, there are a lot of signs that are beginning to show, sometimes to the oblivious state of the worker itself. How does one identify when mental health challenges begin to show itself?
Sure. I mean, it starts from the little things, as you said, and it starts from you no longer being able to control how you're feeling. If you are somebody that is always productive at work, you're able to say, okay, Senzegile, you are not okay today. I'm talking to yourself, but you can do 1, 2, 3, and then you'll be fine, right? Or you are able to think about solutions to the problems that you have so that you're okay. Now, when you start stepping into the state of struggling with your mental health, even consoling yourself and even trying to step out of the state of struggling with your mental health becomes highly impossible or even very difficult for you, where you now start not being able to be productive in the things that you love being productive on. And talking about workplace, you find that you are unable to find joy in the work that you do anymore. You find that going to work is a dread, and that is the biggest sign now of burnout, where you find that you really do not want to be in the workplace environment. But mental health also manifests in your physical health. You start getting sick more often. You start feeling tired all the time. You start feeling very lazy. You start feeling very fatigued. And all of these things are contributions to the bigger picture of a person struggling with a mental illness. But if I were to shortly describe how it feels, it is when you no longer are able to recognize yourself and you do not know what to do about it, because everything that you have tried to do on your own to be better does not seem to be working anymore.
Yeah. How frequent, Richard, are members showing signs and or even talking about potentially suffering from a mental health episode or general, mental health related matters? How frequent and often is that?
Look, it has become quite difficult to determine. Firstly, because for example, with post-traumatic stress disorder, like we're saying that we normally find out about such cases only after certain incidents have taken places. But however, what the SAPS has realized was they are aware of the problem, of course, and they've implemented the employee health and wellness programs. What we have been getting from a lot of our members is that these programs are unreliable, they are not confidential, and for example, within the SAPS, for you to get any form of promotion, you would have to go through various tests, and one of those includes establishing whether you are mentally stable, your mental health is on a stable level. So a lot of officers feel that due to the fact that they have not been confidential, then they jeopardize their chances of being promoted. A lot of members do not use these services. They rather prefer to use private services, and it's quite difficult really to get statistics from the SAPS around how many people they've been assisting.
Yeah, but it's a competency issue here that also comes into play if some members were to raise the fact that they are struggling mentally, because the service would be then saying, are they not fit, for instance, to carry a firearm, and that takes away their job, and so it's a prioritizing of keeping the job over and above, necessarily dealing with the mental health challenges. And just before I go to the break, Richard, just want to ask you, in terms of the disparity around suicides, the stats do reveal that noticeably suicide is higher among men than what it is around women. Is there any indication from your observation about why it does appear that men were to be so expressive in how they deal with their mental health challenges?
Look, it's not clear, but we also know that, for example, within the SAPS, police officers are 11 times likely to commit suicide as compared to normal citizens. And of course, when you compare those stats with other international police around the world, you find that our South African police service members are 5 times more likely to commit suicide. So it's got a lot to do with the underlying issues. I think Ruben also spoke to some of them. The long working hours, the fact that in South Africa police are being killed on a regular basis, the fact that when you wake up as a police officer, you're not even sure if you're going to come back home alive. And of course, the reality is that, financial difficulties have also affected them. Public servants in this current era cannot afford bonded houses, but also they do not qualify for RDP houses. So you find them being backyard dwellers, and of course, that is why, in fact, they become more vulnerable, because they are just within different parts of communities, and their safety is not guaranteed, whether they're in uniform or out of uniform.
Yeah, that's very interesting because there are different circumstances. The one is somebody that's struggling with a mental health disorder and doesn't quite know how to process that, versus an officer that is particularly dealing with a situation and doesn't know how quite to deal with it in the appropriate way, and then takes a very unfortunate decision. So that is what I want to pick up on once we return from the break. And the framing question is, how do we respond to the attitudes towards mental health? Is it witchcraft or isn't it? After the break, we'll pick up on that. So one generation ago, mental health discussions weren't even a thing. And if you were to have a conversation with that one generation ago, you'll hear questions or comments such as, this is a thing that is of witchcraft, you need to turn to God, or you need to be doing something to gain mental strength. How do we deal with the type of attitudes that confront workers? And that's a very interesting paradigm that we have to deal with, Mashongwe, the fact that the attitudes need to shift in order for employers to take a lot more care about the condition of their workers.
I mean, definitely. And I like the fact that you're saying it has to change from the employer's side, because it is the employer that actually sets the culture of the workplace. If I am an employer and I do not take priority in mental health, then my employees are not going to do the same thing. And the shift comes from the relationship that employees have with their employer and the culture of the workplace. If we create more mental health care cultures in the workplace, you find that employees are more likely to use the EAPs, because that is one other issue that we are having in South Africa, that there's so many people that are employed that have access to EAP programs, but they're not being used because of fear and thinking that it will not help, or the issues of confidentiality and so many issues. But if in the workplace it is emphasized and there is a culture and there's a tradition that mental health care is necessary, and that leaders of organizations actually implement certain strategies so that they equip their employees with mental health education, it is very important, because people will not understand what mental health is or the importance of taking care of their mental health if there is no element of mental health education, because you cannot practice what you do not know. In as much as we have shifted so much as a country in terms of managing our mental health and understanding it, there's still a big group and a lot of people that still do not understand the importance of managing and taking care of their mental health. And that is why there's still so many suicide rates. And in terms of, and I'd like to just answer or add to the question that you asked, Richard, in terms of why do so many men take their lives more than women? It is because men actually use harsher methods of taking their lives. It is not the fact that women are less suicidal, but it means that when a man is thinking of taking their lives, or they feel like, okay, it's over, I'm done with this, they would take a gun, they would take a knife, they would throw themselves over a bridge, because they do not have as much fear as a woman would have. So their suicidal rates would normally go up, and that is very dangerous. So it is very important for employers to have a culture and a tradition of mental health care.
How does one establish something like that, a culture, Ruben? And I'd like to maybe just hinge on the example of COVID-19 and the fact that there were so many healthcare workers, for instance, that had to confront the challenges of very long hours under very strict conditions, a lot of that time at great risk to their own health. Did you find that there was a change in culture, to address some of these challenges?
Yeah, first of all, I think the most pertinent matter that we are talking about here is the quality of lives of the employees in the workplace, and also in generally in the public. Because if you go to a workplace where an employee would not be able to ventilate or be able to go and approach the employee wellness, and also one thing that also comes out is the stigma, to say that, like in the place, if you consult and say, I've got issues, then there'll be those kind of perceptions which are wrong, especially for a man to say that, this man is too weak, man. How could he say he's not mentally fine and wants counseling? I mean, more that if you go for counseling, they says, no, we thought you are weak, you are a strong man, you are weak. Those are kind of stigmas that, needs to be removed. And when I'm talking about the quality of life, I'm talking about in the workplace where an employee who has got no, surety that after his payday, he'll still have that payday will sustain him until the next payday. And those are kind of people that obviously, because of their mental well-being, their mental status, they will not be able to be productive. Because instead of being concentrated on the job, we are already thinking about how do I get home? And when I get home, how do I get food? So the quality of life also affects the mental being, the physical being, the emotional being of all employees in the workplace.
Yeah, and I want to put that to you, Mr. Mamabolo. How do we facilitate a conversation that tries to bridge the gap between the mental health challenges of your members, the employer, but also being sensitive to the fact that there are living conditions that also contribute to it? Police officer carries a weapon, happens to be at home. There's issues, a domestic challenge, and the go-to response is to do what is the unthinkable during that particular time. Can one manage something like that?
Yes, just before that, I think what Ruben forgot to tell you was that public servants do not have homes of their own. So that is one other factor. But in general, we have obviously noted the challenges, and we have been engaged with the SAPS in this instance. But however, as a union, we do have programs. We've realized that there is the need to have programs wherein we raise awareness through campaigns and, of course, throughout all our platforms in raising this issue, and also ensuring that members can, at least if they are not free to communicate at their workplaces, they can, within the spaces of unions, start that engagement. So we do have certain tasks that deal with that matter. But however, whatever effort we put in place, the reality is that as long as we do not get the processes corrected within the SAPS itself, within the employer spaces, the likelihood is that we're not going to make much achievement. I think what the point that is being made by Ruben is quite correct, and it's quite right, not only within the nursing sector, but as well as within the policing sector, and obviously different other sectors. So the main thing currently that we're working on is to ensure that we reform the manner in which this employee health and wellness programs are actually given to members.
Yeah. Mashongwe, before I go to a break, I just quickly want to ask the example that I put in that last question, that dealing with mental health challenges, also, but also possessing the inability to respond to high-pressured moments. Is there a distinguishing factor between those two?
I mean, there is definitely a factor. If you're unable to cope with the workload, it is important to be in a culture whereby you're able to express that. And that is something that a lot of workplaces do not have. There isn't a comfort of being able to say, hey, I'm not coping. This is too much for me, which then, like what has been mentioned, actually adds to the mental strain of a person, which then gives a certain idea that the person is not being productive. So it is very important for that to be implemented. And again, having conversations about mental health in the workplace will ensure that people are more open to seeking mental health assistance, and also the stigma becomes less in the workplace. And the issues that have been mentioned, like being a man and being said you are weak because you are wanting counseling, they become more lessened because now everyone becomes comfortable with being able to ask for help when it is needed.
And that's, I think, the point that I want to pick up on is, when do we ask for help? When do we know that we're in that particular condition? Feeling a bit overwhelmed could potentially be anxiety, but how do we identify that? Those are some of the questions I want to pick up on once we return from the break. And Michaela Miller is standing by with this week's Labour News. Do stay with us.
welcome to you. I'm Michaela Miller. Thanks for joining us. The Unemployment Insurance Fund was alerted by a law enforcement agency that an employer made an anonymous threat to kill the UIF official if the audit proceeded. The audits on employers are part of the UIF's Follow the Money campaign to ensure that the right amounts of money were paid over to workers at the right time and that employers did not corruptly misuse or abuse the money. Trucks belonging to an ash transporting company contracted to Eskom were exiting the power station's coal supply gate when they were stopped by security personnel conducting vehicle inspections. Both truck drivers resisted the searches and maintained that the trucks were empty. With the persistence of the security team, the trucks were searched and stolen coal was found in the truck's trailer. Workers went on strike over discrepancies in their pay. The workers shut down the M1 in a city highway. On Friday last week, they marched to the municipal offices where councillors were sitting for the 12th Extraordinary Council meeting. The protest was over the political facilitated agreement agreed in 2016, which was aimed at levelling employees' salaries. The City of Johannesburg and SA Municipal Workers Union reached an agreement. The SAMU Gauteng secretary said they have agreed to a process. A task team is going to look into the matter from the 14th to the 18th of November. From there, the city will endeavour to pay workers at least some of the portions of the outstanding wages by the end of December. It is estimated that more than 6,500 migrant workers have lost their lives constructing the $220 billion infrastructure for Qatar to host the 2022 FIFA Football World Cup. However, the Qatar government has said that the total is misleading because not all the deaths of workers recorded were of people working on the World Cup-related projects. And lastly, workers at Apple and Foxconn are demanding better working conditions. With more than 200,000 workers employed, Foxconn is Apple's top global supplier and has drawn attention to its poor working conditions. The Zhengzhou factory complex is said to have been pushing an inhumane closed-loop management regime, forbidding workers from leaving their work areas. In addition, the country has had an outbreak of COVID-19, and it is alleged that workers infected by the virus have been isolated with no medical access and supplies. Labour activists and their allies in China launched a campaign demanding accountability from Apple and Foxconn, which manufactures half of the world's iPhones. Well, that's a wrap from my side. You can share your thoughts or story with us by sending an email to labour@wwmp.org.za. Over to Tashriq to continue this week's topic of discussion.
All right, and that's, I think, the challenge. We talk about mental health and in the workplace and how to deal with that. There are contextual challenges, as we've been able to establish, but there's also, conditional challenges to the immediate working environment, how to process and deal with that. But before we know how to deal with it, Mashongwe is being able to identify it. And I think for the most part, people in the previous generations may have experienced it, but didn't quite give it a term. And so when I'm dealing with a difficult circumstance in my workplace and I do feel a bit overwhelmed, is that just feeling overwhelmed? Or how do I know when it's anxiety, for instance?
Sure. So I like that you ask it that way. Am I feeling just overwhelmed or is it anxiety? Because both can be a reality. You could be undergoing or you could be part of a project at that moment that is quite overwhelming for you, but you could also be a person that is always feeling overwhelmed, no matter how big or small the project is, and you really feel like you are not coping and you feel like the work is too much, the pressure is too much, and that no matter how much you are trying to catch on, it is difficult for you and you're just struggling to make sense of everything, and you feel like everyone around you is understanding the tasks and the works and is able to meet the deadlines, but you are struggling to. So anxiety, the one thing about anxiety is that it cripples you. It cripples you from being productive because anxiety works a lot with your mind, right? So it makes you feel confused. It makes you doubt yourself, and you start thinking quite a lot. So overthinking can also cause a lot of strain, because when you start overthinking, it means that your mind tells you one thing now, and then 2 seconds later, it tells you something different, which causes a lot of disturbances in terms of your productivity as well. Anxiety also shows in your body. So it's not just overthinking and excessive worry and fear, but it is also what you feel in your body. So someone that is really anxious would feel in a state of anxiety, a sense of not being able to breathe properly, feeling like there's something huge sitting on top of their chest, feeling very uncomfortable, feeling like their fingers are tingling or their fingers are sweating, and feeling like they are really unable to move because they feel stuck, or they feel as though they are shocked, or that feeling that is very uncomfortable. And some people, we find that they experience digestive issues as well when they are feeling anxious. So anxiety is something that you know and feel that it is not normal, because it really cripples you from being functional.
Yeah, that's a very, very important distinguishing factor to consider. I wonder, though, whether, Mr. Maleka, whether legislation, you spoke earlier about an example where the Department of Health has brought in a service provider with which to assess mental health. Surely that is not something that every department in government can afford or have made provision for. How, in the absence of an external party, do we begin to implement a different culture around how we understand mental health and how we deal with it?
Yeah, first of all, is the question of advocacy. When people start to speak and be able to know about a particular phenomenon, such as, like you say, to the workplace, familiarize the staff or in the workplace, familiarize everybody with the issue of mental health, so that everybody would be in a position to identify when there's a challenge. Whether this person's got anxiety or feel like depressed, with the knowledge that is being advocated, one can be able to assess, you know what, it looks like I'm on this state. What do I do? Who do I talk to? Where do I go in terms of assistance? So what needs to be done is that we need to talk about the mental health generally in the workplace and generally in the society. Much needs to be done to advocate the issue of mental health, whether through Department of Social Development or Department of Health in the communities, because sometimes in the communities, just people look at you and say, this man is mad, and without even understanding the state of the mind of a person. And it can also, with that kind of, attack on individual, can lead to a serious consequence of a person deciding otherwise, because of people do not understand the state, the mental state of a person, and they judge that particular person. So,
and imagine you're working inside the South African Police Services, and you, come forward to say you're dealing with a challenge. The stigma even becomes a lot more intensified. I just want to go to Richard quickly on that point. Do police officers, after they've come across a very gruesome crime scene, or they were involved in a shooting, or they were shot at, are there mandatory psych evaluations, or where they go through a process to see whether post-traumatic stress is a factor in the aftermath of what they were confronted with?
Most definitely. That is a process which is available, but however, like I indicated earlier on, there's lack of reliability. And in fact, in cases where you do have debriefing sessions taking place, the people who actually do that function would not necessarily be available for everyone at the same time. Remember, again, I think in dealing with some of these matters, we also need to not only focus on the mental health issue itself, but we need to focus on the root causes of leading towards this mental disorder. And you would know that, for example, our workers in the public service are currently overwhelmed, but as well, the staff complement has been on a decrease regularly. So that means there's more work for those limited members of the staff. So already conditions that are there create conditions where mental health is not something that is far-fetched, really.
Yeah, and I mean, that is a very terrible scenario that we have to confront. But once I return from the break, I want to talk about understanding the fact that we are dealing with a problem that isn't just, born in the workplace. Yes, there are scenarios when people do go to work and they deal with very difficult people, and it can bring on an episode of mental health. But there's also the living conditions of people, the safety issue, the lack of hygiene, the lack of food, the money issues, the family issues. Those are all contributing factors to the overall mental well-being of an individual and that particular worker. And that's what we want to pick up on once we do return from the break. We're talking about mental health and the challenges that come with it, because we realize, as we've been discussing, that without it, we cannot have a productive worker while at work. And that is something that comes with an increasing challenge, but also trying to shift attitudes in the process. Ms. Shongwe, the discussion, in fact, the framing question just before we went to the break, dealing with the fact that we are wholesome human beings. We have work, yes, but we also have family lives. We have conditional challenges, our living environments, our family issues, etc., domestic challenges. These, I suppose, are all contributing factors to what ends up happening in the workplace as well, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. And I like the fact that you mentioned all of these factors, which brings me to this important point that I'm going to say now. Each and every human being has got the responsibility of taking care of their mental health. You do not start looking after your mental health when you see that there's a problem. Why am I saying this? Because there will always be stressors, there will always be issues, there will always be pressure, because we are human beings that are getting affected by different things all the time. And most of those things are things that are not predictable and things that we do not call upon ourselves. So it is not just the workplace environment that causes stressors. There's quite a lot of things that people go through on a day-to-day basis. If you do not build a culture or a norm of building self-help techniques or implementations in your life which secure you and that make you to be able to sustain your mental health, you may be in danger or in a vulnerability to getting a mental illness like anxiety, like depression, like burnout, like chronic stress, because you are not equipped already with tools that make you to feel better when you are feeling slightly sad or slightly anxious, because all of these emotions are quite normal, right? But they can be a dysfunctionality, they can be a disorder if you do not equip yourself with the tools to take care of your mental health on a day-to-day basis.
And I want to come back to you before we wrap up on how to do that. Let's quickly go to Ruben. On dealing with a manager or a director general or a supervisor that has the capability to know people and to work with people and be able to respond to a condition that is confronting them in a particular moment. Do you find that throughout the public service that those that are in a supervisory role or in a managerial role, that they kind of are aware of these issues that we're discussing?
Yeah, of course. Fortunately, in the public service, although it's not effective, most of the departments have what is called employee wellness directorate, where they are responsible. It will result under human resource management, where they will specifically be employed to look after the well-being of the employees. Whether employees got emotional challenge or physical challenge, they'll have to make sure that there's provision. Because like when you talk about physical challenge, if this person says, I require assistance in terms of accessing the workplace, then they have to see how they can assist. So all these kind of the wellness in the workplace, they need to be enhanced, because in many respects, you might find that in the department, there is no advocacy. It's not being published. You'll find that people don't understand how to access that particular directorate for assistance. So all what you need for now is that there needs to be more talk about this mental health and how people can get help, whether in the workplace or in the society.
And Richard, I mean, same question to you. Do you find that HR managers are sensitive to these discussions that we're having and are capable and worthy of responding?
Yeah, look, I think Ruben covered all the issues that I would have raised. I do definitely agree with his views. And I think further, well, anyway, I'm speaking from the experiences from within my sector, would be the fact that, despite the fact that the government has realized that there is this challenge and it needs to be dealt with through this employee health and wellness programs, the staff capacity of this program is limited. They use psychologists, they use priests, and and of course the availability of such people to be everywhere at the same time, considering the fact that our police officers, unlike many other careers, have to face daily challenges on a regular basis and would therefore need regular counseling as opposed to perhaps other workers who face lesser insecurities. So it really depends around the different sectors that people work in. But within our sector, I believe that there's a lot more that definitely still to be done.
Yeah, I just quickly want to go back, to you, Ruben. The Occupational Health and Safety Act, and particularly these issues, when matters are dealt with at collective bargaining, does the conversation on mental health come up or not?
Yes, obvious. It is one of the key standing items, especially from us as PSA. We make sure that each and every department, because we are general in the public service, where we are recruiting, where we are present, that each and every bargaining chamber or bargaining forum or a bargaining council, there is an agenda item that deals with occupational health and safety. That includes everything in totality to make sure that we have healthy employees who are able to perform.
Okay. Mashongwe, that last question. How do I deal with it?
How do you deal with your mental health on a day-to-day basis? I have to say that this is something that takes a lot of effort and dedication, right? It has to be very intentional. You have to do it because you want to be better and you want to be okay. And this is something that you create. It's a list that you create for you. So you could be someone that says, when I go and watch soccer with my friends, I feel lighter. When I exercise, I feel happier. When I play with my kids, I feel so much better. And one way for me to distress is if maybe I jog or I go out. So it is creating that list of things that make you feel better and that make you to enjoy life much better. Taking time out of work, taking time away from toxic people, toxic friends, toxic family members, just to focus on your happiness and just to focus on yourself. And knowing and being comfortable that if you are struggling and you do not have the support structure that is needed for you to be able to talk and to ventilate, to be comfortable enough to reach out to a counselor, to a psychologist, to a psychiatrist, so that you are able to get the necessary assistance. Another thing that is very important, it is to have a good support system. That is very important. If you've got people in your life around you that add to your stress, that are toxic to you, it is time for you to kind of shift away from those people and look around your circle of friends and family members. Who are the people that I can talk to when I'm not feeling okay? Because another leading cause of suicide is feeling alone and feeling like there isn't someone that I can talk to or that I can share my troubles with. So having a good support structure, having people in your life that feed positivity in your life and surrounding yourself with those people in those environments can actually take you miles in terms of dealing with your mental health. Please do not try to deal with it on your own. Get the necessary support.
And SEDAC has a lovely toll-free number for you to call as long as you are going through those challenges. Even if there is nobody in your immediate circle, there is help out there. So please find it. On that note, thank you very much for having been with us in what is definitely a very important conversation that's got to do with your own personal well-being. And as Mashongwe said, it is your personal responsibility, but also seek the help that you so desperately need in order for you to be a functional human being in your community and, of course, at the workplace. Until we chat again, have a lovely day. Until we meet again, thank you very much for tuning in.